Welcome, everybody. Full boat again. Got a full class, so that's good. I'm going to open it up to questions and answers. If you have a question, just go ahead and ask, and we'll go over it. Basically, we have an open discussion forum for this particular class. So, obviously, what we're dealing with in here is wellness. We want to know how to live life well, what to do. In order to be successful, productive, happy, content, prosperous in life. So that's the purpose of the class. Unfortunately, that has many nuances to it, and there's many different ways to get to the end goal. So we're going to discuss ones that are the most practical, and there's a lot of dysfunction in the world, and people have different dysfunctions. Nobody's the same. Everybody's different. So really the concepts that we're trying to impress upon you are, how do we recognize our particular type, an individual's particular type of dysfunction, because it may be different than other people's. And then not only how to recognize it, but where does it come from so we can understand it, and then what to do about it. Okay, so there's a process to that, obviously. One of the problems that I see, and I hear a lot about, especially with a lot of the patients that I see, is family contact me and say, hey, I have my son, my daughter, my brother, my spouse is suffering from mental health or substance abuse issues. And they're like, we don't know what to do. So I want to cover that portion of that, because a lot of times the parents or the brother, the significant other, they come in and they're like, well, I don't know what to do. You know, he's suffering, he has this problem, how do I help? And what I think the problem is not the intent of help, but really the execution of how to help. And I think people are ignorant of that, and there's a stigma to it, okay? The problem also lies in the fact that most of the time the person that's sick is sick because of the family dynamics. Does that make sense? It's not just him or her that's sick. It's the system that he was raised in. It was the whole family is part of it, okay? So we're going to go over a couple things like enabling and what addiction is, what are some of the criteria to that, and family dynamics, all those good stuff. Because a lot of times I get calls and people just are confused as to what to do, how to proceed, what the process is, okay? So it'll be helpful to at least understand. And then if you have somebody, which I would say the vast majority of people in here have somebody that they know that's suffering with substance abuse and mental health that may be reasonably functional, and they're not sure how to handle that or what to do about it. Yes, sir.
Basically, it started at the household.
Most of the time, it starts in the home. It starts in the home of parenting.
Right.
So children are learn a lifestyle, a way of living that isn't functional, and it could be that most of the time it's a single family home, a fatherless home, or a home where the mother or the father works in an inordinate amount of hours. So they didn't get the developmental milestone children need in order to develop properly. They didn't learn the coping skills. They didn't get the attachment, the connection with their parents. And because of that, they have these unmet needs. The love, attention, sense of belonging, safety, and security, which means discipline, structure, and routine. So they don't learn impulse control. They don't learn delayed gratification. They become entitled, overindulged, spoiled, if you will, because of the lack of discipline and the lack of modeling of healthy coping behavior, issues of abandonment, self-esteem issues. All of that stems from a family dynamic that's unhealthy.
It's like a dark side of it.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, there is a dark side to all families, not intentionally. Listen, you could be filled with lots of love in the house and good intention, but if you don't develop properly and you're missing half of the equation, there's going to be problems. There's going to be developmental problems. There's going to be a lack of coping skills, et cetera, et cetera. So typically what I see is with divorce, that's the most common one, are single family homes. A military deployment, somebody passed away, a spouse passed away, or again, somebody working 80, 90 hours a week or travels a lot, one of the spouses. So the kids don't get that connection with both parents, or there's just a single family home. And that's the biggest predictor of dysfunction in a child is single family homes or fatherless homes. Okay. How do we recognize it? Well, that's kind of easy because you're going to see developmental problems in the child straight off. Kids may be what they call nowadays attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Okay. Is it a disorder? Certainly. There is hyperactivity, there is attention deficits, there are issues with cognitive delays and developmental issues.
And some homes just get separated from homes, like they can get separated.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I mean. They
like,
absolutely, and that's what the
apart.
abandonment portion
Like
is.
they can get apart, they would work out, and then now they like it's kind of weekend dad.
Yeah.
Or either just
But
every
that's
night
just
when you
that's
see 'em.
it's better than not having a dad, but it's still inconsistent, it's unreliable, and it doesn't meet the needs. See what I'm saying? What he's saying is, hey, listen, even though the parents may separate, the kid may still see his father,
Right.
but it may be every other week. And is the dad invited to the games and stuff? Probably not. Is there going to be conflict with the other, the spouse, the divorcee? Probably. Is that going to lead to bad mouthing the parents and so on? You see, there's so many nuances to it. But we're going to stick to the basics. And the basic is when children are separated from both parents and live in that type of environment, when there's only one parent, is there going to be more consistency or less consistency in structure, routine, and discipline? Less, significantly less, especially if that person's working an extra, the 60 to 80 hours a week. How are you going to be home to do that? How are you going to enforce that? You're going to be exhausted, tired, worn out, frustrated. That's going to lead to very inconsistent patterns of stability in the home. Does that make sense? Which automatically means that kid's going to be living in more chaos, more inconsistency. And when you have a child growing up with inconsistency and chaos, without structure and routine or discipline, it causes an uncomfortable feeling for that child, which is essentially energy. And that energy in that child who is chaotic and doesn't have any structure and routine, which keeps him sound and structured, well, then he's going to have those feelings of extra energy, which is hyperactivity. And when you have a child with hyperactivity, how do they release that energy? Through play. So these children aren't going to be playing like other children because they're not in control. They have extra energy. So they're going to play aggressively. They're going to be all over the place. There's going to be problems with that hyperactivity. And that's going to lead to awkward socialization. The kid's not going to play well with others because he's aggressive and he's hyperactive, and he's going to end up causing issues with the interaction with other children, which is going to lead to usually feelings of awkwardness or feelings of inadequacy or rejection and being made fun of by other kids because they're not developing properly. And if you're doing poorly in school, you're getting in trouble all the time. Is that good for a child's self-esteem? Is that going to make them popular with other kids? No. So do you see, it's going to affect self-esteem. It's going to affect that kid's performance, and that's going to be internalized. And usually that leads to social withdrawal or isolation and almost a depression to some degree. Yes, sir?
So what happens when kids or anybody, they do grow up with both parents, and you still spiral down the other way?
Okay, he's saying in this scenario, and this is a very unlikely scenario, if a child grows up in a two-family home where there's consistency and attachment and they meet all the needs, that won't happen. It literally won't happen unless there's a catastrophic event. Catastrophic means a secondary issue. Let's say that the kid's well developed but ends up in a car accident where he loses a spouse, his father or mother, or he's injured and has a sickness or illness, or one of the fathers or the mother have an accident and is impaired, something like that, a catastrophic event could lead to that dysfunction. But if you have two well-adjusted, reasonably well-adjusted parents that are functional and raise the child reasonably well and meet all those needs, there will be no dysfunction unless a catastrophic event occurs.
Yeah, but sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
It can play a role too when it's two parents, but and they not guiding the right way. It might be abusive.
Well, that's not healthy and well adjusted. So if you're talking about abusive homes, of course that's used to be the number one reason for dysfunction in children. So that's the old standby standard. Back in the day when there were two parents, if they were abusive or neglectful, then of course the child would be affected, and that was the major issue. But now with the prevalence of divorce at around 70%, single family homes raising children, well, the dysfunction doesn't have to be abuse anymore. It's lacking. Now that's a question I always get. What about peer pressure? But if I'm in a well-adjusted family that taught me stability and impulse control and delayed gratification and right from wrong and to talk to them, and they're stable, are they going to be influenced by peer pressure? A little bit, but not enough to do drugs or something horrible. Does that make sense? So of course they're influenced by their peers, but not in saying, hey, well, let's go do drugs, or let's go beat this person up, or let's go steal this. That would be extreme, and they would be inoculated from it because of the stability of the parenting. Does that make sense? But if you leave that kid in that vulnerable household where there's abuse or neglect or the lack of those parents' stability, or a single family home where they have the instability of that, of course they're going to be affected by that, greatly influenced by that.
I think that's the right way, and it ain't.
Well, I know, but that's the problem, is the misunderstanding that it's okay to raise a child with a single family home, and that you can marry the government to support you, and you don't need a man or a woman in the household to raise the child. That's false. You need two people, a man and a woman. Masculinity is essential, and so is femininity. And they have to work in tandem together. Otherwise, there will be dysfunction, period. There's no escape from that. That's inevitable. So you need those two. Does that make sense? Ideally. Otherwise, there's going to be problems. And again, the biggest problems we see are what? Oppositional defiant disorder. You see attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and cognitive developmental delays. Those are the big ones. Throw in depression a little later on, or anxiety.